Well, good morning again, church. I hope you're having a great Thursday morning so far. And this morning we're going to be looking at the 7th discussion question from this last week, where it focuses on sharing the gospel. So it starts off saying, how would you share the gospel with someone else if the opportunity arrived? What is your testimony? What have you seen and heard that you can't keep from sharing with others? And really what I think is important to look at is we're going to look at Acts chapter 3, starting in verse 12. And we're not going to read the whole passage and the whole speech that Peter goes into here, but we're going to read just the first part. It says, when Peter saw this, and what he saw is all these people coming together, seeing this man that had been healed, and they were all looking at Peter and John as if they had done it, and he makes it clear, fellow Israelites, why are you amazed at this? Why do you stare at us as though we had made him walk by our own power or godliness? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our ancestors, has glorified his servant Jesus, whom you handed over and denied before Pilate, though he had decided to release him. You denied the Holy and Righteous One and asked to have a murderer released to you. You killed the source of life, whom God raised from the dead. We are witnesses of this. By faith in his name has made this man strong, whom you see and know. So the faith that comes through Jesus has given him this perfect health in front of all of you. In an instance where Peter could have easily said, yeah, we're pretty great, aren't we? This guy was healed. He recognized Peter really didn't do all that much in this scenario. He simply allowed God to work through him. That it was God who healed this man. He was pointing out just the facts of the situation. And I think too often we try to overcomplicate things. Sometimes all we have to do is point at how God's worked in our own life and say, isn't it incredible that God did that? That I didn't really have anything to do with how the scenario played out, but God allowed it to play out in this way. And I was incredibly blessed by it. And I just wanted to share that with you. And we can just simply go about it that way. I think one of the number one things that I hear, not just in students, but adults as well, is this idea that they're not comfortable with sharing their faith. Feel like, I don't have all the answers. Like, I don't know if I start to share my faith, then I'm going to trip up on my words. I'm not that great with wording things. And we just try to come up with excuses of why we shouldn't do it. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of reasons not to. There's a lot of things you can be afraid of when it comes to sharing your faith. But here's what I also know. If we just sit there and continue to dwell on that, we're never going to share our faith like God's word tells us to. And it does say that every person is meant to share our faith. Instead, what we need to do, if you're not comfortable sharing your faith, you don't feel like you word it very well, then practice. Be in God's word. Read how you can articulate at least the basics of what Jesus did on the cross and the gospel and what that means for you. Practice your testimony. That way you're not getting caught up on parts of your personal story that you all of a sudden realize, I don't really need to focus on that part as much as I am. You're not going to think through that unless you practice it out loud. I can tell you when it comes to sermons or anything that I do, I talk to myself in a room and go through it out loud to make sure I'm not wording it in a bad way. Sometimes I'm talking to myself and realize that's confusing. That's not going to make sense to somebody. And I have to go back and think through how to say it again. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't practice it first. Even our testimony, as weird as that might sound, like you have to practice sharing your own story. When the point of sharing our story is pinpointing and highlighting what God's done in our story and how he's radically changed us, yeah, we need to make sure we're actually highlighting those things and not getting bogged into other details. And so my recommendation is, one, make sure in everything in our lives we are pointing the glory back to God. He's the one who deserves the glory for the blessings in our lives, for anything that goes on. He deserves the credit. But number two, if you're not comfortable sharing your faith, that's okay. But don't just stay there. Practice. Be in God's word to try and understand how to articulate it better and run through it out loud if you have to. Just be thinking through, how would I share my faith if I were in a situation? Because it is so important to make sure we do practice for when that situation comes up. Because I can tell you this, God's going to place people in your life for you to share the gospel with. And it's a good idea that we try to prepare for that and be ready so that they might be able to come to know the Lord by God working through us. We'll see you guys soon.